son of late martial arts star Bruce Lee has died. 27-year-old Brandon Lee was killed during a movie set accident today. He was filming a scene for the movie The Crow.
Brandon Lee was young, talented, and finally stepping out of his legendary father's shadow. Then, just days before wrapping his breakthrough role in The Crow, he was fatally shot on set.
He was lying with his head against the door and his feet facing towards the camera. When Brandon didn't get up, everyone was stunned. Everyone heard the medic go, "Brandon, are you all right?" The place just went, whew. It was like dead quiet.
What followed was a whirlwind of confusion, cover-ups, and conspiracy theories that refused to die. Why was a real bullet inside a prop gun? Who failed to check the weapon? And why were so many safety rules ignored? We'll break down the chilling parallels to Bruce Lee's death, unravel the truth behind the set's so-called curse, and reveal the final twist that shocked even the investigators. The fatal scene that changed everything. It was supposed to be a straightforward scene, a routine action beat in a film full of violence, grit, and stylized vengeance. Brandon Lee, playing the lead role of Eric Draven in The Crow, was set to burst through a doorway, arms full of groceries, only to be ambushed by thugs. One of them, played by actor Michael Massey, would raise his revolver and fire. Brandon's character was meant to collapse dramatically to the ground. It was all carefully choreographed. It had been rehearsed. And by the standards of Hollywood gunplay, it wasn't even that risky. But the moment the camera rolled that night, everything unraveled. The scene began as expected. Massey raised the revolver and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, loud and sudden, but no one panicked. Not at first. Crew members had heard dozens of similar bangs during production. Brandon fell to the ground just like he was supposed to. Massey remained in character. The director called cut. Applause followed. For a few seconds, it seemed like they'd nailed it. Then someone noticed Brandon wasn't moving. At first, there was confusion. A quiet beat of uncertainty swept across the room. Was he still acting? Was he waiting for a second cue? Then someone called out to him. No answer. Panic set in fast. People rushed over. Someone shouted for an ambulance. Crew members flipped Brandon over and saw the blood soaking through his shirt. Not fake blood, but real, pulsing from a wound in his abdomen. He had been shot, not with a blank, not with a harmless prop, but with something real. The set descended into chaos. Paramedics were called. Brandon was rushed to New Hanover Regional Medical Center and underwent hours of emergency surgery. Doctors tried desperately to stop the internal bleeding, but the bullet had torn through too much. Despite every effort, Brandon Lee was pronounced dead at 1:03 p.m. on March 31, 1993. He was 28 years old. The immediate response of the production crew was a state of disbelief. Accidents do happen on set, but never like this. Not when the prop gun was supposed to have blanks loaded, which creates the sound and muzzle flash, but shoots no projectile. Yet something had pierced Brandon's body with lethal efficiency. Everything had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. The actor who had pulled the trigger, Michael Massey, was devastated. The moment the gravity of the occurrence hit him, he later termed it the night that robbed him of his innocence. Massey stayed away from acting for quite a long time, terrified of speaking about that night. It was said by many on the production that he never really recovered. Brandon Lee slain on set. Actor dies in freak accident. Such were the headlines that broke to the world. Yet beyond the headlines, behind it lurked a storm of unanswered questions. How could this happen on a movie set, like those seen in professional terms? Who was in charge of maintaining gun safety? Why was the weapon not inspected prior to the scene? And most chillingly, what exactly was inside that gun when the trigger was pulled? The official report issued at the beginning was vague. Some speculated a blank misfiring. Others said a fragment of debris might be lodged in the barrel. But all of the above could not stand in light of the autopsy report. A real .44 caliber slug taken out from Brandon's body. That's not just an accident. It is a loaded weapon that shoots a rising star in front of a room full of people. And this wasn't the first time something went wrong on that set. Not even close. The Curse of the Crow set. Long before Brandon Lee collapsed on the studio floor, people on set were already whispering that the Crow was cursed. The production had been plagued with bizarre mishaps from day one. Just a few weeks into filming, a crew member, a carpenter, was horrifically burned after a piece of equipment he was working on made contact with live wires. It was a freak accident, something that could have easily turned fatal. The same day, 2 other crew members were injured in unrelated incidents. That day alone was enough to spark rumors, but the bad luck didn't stop there. Set pieces malfunctioned. Equipment failed. A storm destroyed part of the outdoor set. Actors were injured in small but accumulating ways. At first, people laughed it off. They started calling it the Curse of the Crow as a joke. But behind the laughter was a growing unease. Even seasoned professionals who'd worked on dozens of productions began to feel something was off. Then came the long nights. The cast and crew were pushed to the brink with 18-hour days and brutal turnaround times. Some were clocking 90 to 100 hours a week, barely able to sleep or think clearly. That kind of exhaustion isn't just unsustainable, it's dangerous. Corners were cut. Safety protocols became loose. The pressure to finish the film on time was crushing. With so many dangerous stunts already in the can, people assumed the worst was behind them. They couldn't have been more wrong. Moreover, there was the story itself, which added to the morbidly grotesque atmosphere. The crow tale of a man who, along with his betrothed, was slain and who rises from the grave to take revenge on both. This was dark and violent, poetic, a gothic fantasy steeped in death and vengeance. Brandon's role, that of Eric Draven, is resurrected post-mortem. None would have failed to recognize the symbolism after his actual death. The lines blurring had been painted because of that grim fantasy for those witnessing both realities. Julianne Gary, a journalist for Entertainment Weekly covering production, spoke about the very unsettling mood around the set. Nothing ever seemed to go right, she said. There was a sustained thread of trepidation that just grew worse as filming continued. By the time Brandon was preparing to shoot his final scenes, many were already nervous. They had made it through so many close calls, he thought. Almost over, just a week or two more of shooting, and then they could finally rest from all this. Little did they know that their biggest danger was yet to come. The scene that was to take the life of Brandon was one that was never thought to have been considered a big deal. It had no requirement of a stunt double, no explosions, or fire. It was as simple as Brandon walking through a door carrying groceries. He gets shot, falls, and then the camera is stopped. Done. No one expects an extraordinary event, and yet it became the saddest moment in the whole production. The making of the movie. It was in the aftermath of Brandon's death that many began to be introspective concerning the destiny of the crow from the start.
And we waited around for hours, and then they came out and told us that he'd passed on.
As if propelling it to be doomed even before the shooting began. Some theorized supernatural interventions. Some linked whatever had happened with the script itself, an ill motif wrapped around the whole issue of violence and resurrection. Very few pointed out the kind of close personal relationship with death that Brandon had, considering, for instance, that he had buried his father, Bruce Lee, when he was just 8 years old, under very enigmatic circumstances. One crew member has said that he will only speak under anonymity in line with this. People have tried to say it was haunted. I don't know about that, but there were definitely bad vibes on the set. The truth about the gun that slayed him? That would reveal something far worse than a curse. The smoking gun. After the initial shock faded and the grief settled in, investigators turned their attention to one critical question. How did a real bullet end up in a movie prop gun? This wasn't a case of a misfired blank or a stunt gone wrong. The autopsy confirmed that a full .44 caliber slug had pierced Brandon Lee's abdomen, a fact that shattered the illusion that this was just a freak accident. It meant a deadly mistake had occurred somewhere in the chain of command, and someone had loaded that weapon with a round capable of slaying. The revolver used in the scene was a real firearm, a Smith & Wesson Model 629-44 Magnum. In Hollywood, it's not uncommon to use real guns for authenticity. They're modified to fire blanks, which produce a loud bang and muzzle flash without a bullet. But this time, something went horribly wrong. Here's what actually happened. Earlier in production, the crew had shot a close-up scene involving the same revolver. For realism, the gun needed to appear loaded, so they used dummy rounds. These look like real bullets, but they're supposed to be completely inert. No powder, no primer, just for show. But the props team made a critical mistake. While they removed the gunpowder, they left the primer in the dummy cartridges. Now, in a real bullet, the primer is what ignites the powder to fire the bullet. Even without powder, a primer still carries a small explosive charge. When one of the dummy rounds was dry-fired during that earlier close-up, the primer went off just enough to dislodge the bullet from its casing and push it into the barrel of the gun, a condition known as a squib load. No one noticed. No one checked the barrel afterward. The bullet continued to sit on the barrel of the gun, a deadly waiting trap. Days later, dummy cartridges were extracted from the barrel in preparation for Brandon's scene, and nothing was put in its stead except for blanks. Blanks keep gunpowder and a primer, but they have no actual bullet at the end. They are designed to simulate real gunfire for the motion picture, not firing a projectile, with flashes, smoke, and sound. But now that there was a stuck bullet in the barrel with a blank behind it, something abhorrent happened. Michael Massey pulled the trigger, igniting the blank, and the gas and pressure caused by that resulted in the forcing the lodged bullet out of the barrel as if it were a live round. There was no sign. There was no jam, just a thunderous gunshot and the flash of light, and Brandon was on the floor. By the time anyone could perceive correctly, it was already too late. It wasn't merely an accident, but a concatenation of negligence. The weapon should have undergone inspection. The dummy rounds should have been properly manufactured. The firearm should have been cleared by a licensed armorer, in particular, before any live pyrotechnics were exercised on the set. But here is the most horrifying part. There was no licensed weapons master present on the set that night. Instead, a stressed, exhausted, and likely unqualified prop assistant handled a working gun with an understanding of what job hazards it posed. Most likely none. One could call this level of negligence criminal anywhere else. In Hollywood, they called it an error. The official investigation later corroborated this line of events leading to Brandon's death. However, while the report classified the event as an accident, many in the industry and Brandon's close family believed it fell closer to criminal negligence. One insignificant lapse, one overlooked safety check.
You know, here it is, the curse has hit us again.
The fact that there were certain incidents, say, on the Crow that happened before Brandon's accident.
One stray bullet that should never have been there, and a whole life, a rising star, ending in 10 minutes. But if this was all just negligence, why did some people start whispering about sabotage?
Television or film or otherwise, we will not use real guns ever again.
When you dig deeper into the production of The Crow, a disturbing pattern emerges, one that goes far beyond a single tragic mistake. Behind Brandon Lee's death was a web of shortcuts, exhaustion, miscommunication, and dangerously relaxed safety protocols. What happened that night wasn't just the result of a technical error. It was the inevitable consequence of a film set pushed past its breaking point. The Crow was operating on a tight schedule and a tight budget. It wasn't a major studio blockbuster. It was a gritty mid-budget action film trying to stretch every dollar. As the shoot dragged on, so did the pressure to finish fast. Delays meant costs, and costs meant risk. So corners were cut, protocols were bent, and roles that experts should have filled were handed off to exhausted staff with little room for mistakes. The film's armorer, the person legally responsible for handling all weapons on set, wasn't even present the night Brandon was shot. That responsibility had fallen to a prop assistant, someone with no formal training in firearm safety. They weren't licensed, weren't certified, and didn't fully understand how to clear or check a gun properly. In fact, there were reports that the same crew had been handling both real and fake rounds with little distinction, casually mixing them during earlier scenes without careful separation. Theoretically, a gun should be declared safe only after having been checked by 3 people: the armorer, the assistant director, and the actor. The Crow bypassed that whole chain of responsibility. The gun was loaded, passed to the actor, and fired without an inspection from any of the parties involved. And it was not just that night that was dangerous. It was the whole atmosphere of the shoot. Crew members later maintained they were working 18-hour days, 6 days a week, sometimes exceeding 90 hours. That kind of fatigue is not just unhealthy, it's incredibly dangerous, especially given the stunts, pyrotechnics, and firearms on any set. People stopped checking things twice. Mistakes became usual. Warnings were ignored for the sake of being on time. An anonymous team member expressed, "Safety measures, all of them were surely not followed. If better managed, it could have been avoided." Of course, the studio denied such claims. They insisted that the cast and crew were professionals and that working under intense conditions was standard in the industry. Even some of the executives admitted privately that, indeed, the schedule had been brutal. The shoot was wearing people down. The most alarming fact? The dummy rounds used earlier, the very same ones that gave the lodged bullet, they actually made them in-house, that is, made by the effects team, not sourced from a professional manufacturer, not inspected by a ballistics pro. It was just improvised and rushed like so many other things on set. If someone had just taken 5 more minutes to check that barrel, if the armorer had been present, if the crew hadn't been pushed into exhaustion, Brandon Lee might still be here. Not just breakdowns, these constituted a systematic failure. And in their aftermath lay a damning indictment against how safety could be sacrificed on the altar of speed, budgetary constraints, and blind faith in procedures. Hollywood is supposed to be a land of illusion. But that night, the illusion failed. A real bullet claimed a real life. Still, there was one question that no amount of negligence could explain. Why did this echo the death of Bruce Lee so closely? A chilling family parallel. When news of Brandon Lee's death broke, the shock wasn't limited to Hollywood. It reverberated through pop culture, martial arts communities, and most hauntingly, through the hearts of those who remembered what had happened exactly 20 years earlier to another rising star, his father, Bruce Lee. The similarities were too strange to ignore. Two actors from the same family. Both died young. Both were under mysterious circumstances. Both are on the brink of superstardom. And both were taken in a way that sparked endless speculation, suspicion, and sorrow. Bruce Lee's death in 1973 was surrounded by just as much confusion as Brandon's. Officially, the cause was cerebral edema, swelling of the brain. But to this day, some members of his family believe he was slain. Theories included allergic reactions, secret health conditions, and the most persistent rumor of all: retaliation from the Triads, a powerful criminal organization with deep ties to the Hong Kong film industry. According to martial arts expert Ed Parker Jr., whose father had trained Bruce, the theory wasn't just urban legend. He claimed that Bruce was outspoken, independent, and refused to bow to the traditional power structures in the Eastern film world. "It was in my father's opinion," he said, "that there was definitely foul play involved." Now, 20 years later, Brandon Lee dies from a gunshot on a film set, in a scene where he's shot while acting, just like Bruce Lee's character in Game of Death. In that 1978 film, Bruce's character is an actor on a movie set, filming a scene involving a gun. Unbeknownst to him, a real bullet is loaded into one of the prop weapons by an assassin. During the scene, he was really shot. It is a storyline that eerily parallels Brandon's own fate. Life imitating art, or perhaps in the eeriest way possible, art imitating life. That did not go unnoticed. Before long, it was picked up by fans, journalists, and conspiracy theorists alike. A coincidence? A tragic mimicry? Or something far more eerie? Brandon had a great future, just like his father. The only difference was that he didn't follow in his father's footsteps. He was expanding that legacy. The Crow was touted to be his break. This was a breakout performance for him after years of smaller roles and low-budget action films. Most of the movie had already been filmed. He was about to tie the knot with his longtime girlfriend, Eliza Hutton. Life was falling into place until, just like Bruce, he was taken away before he could see it. Then there were some people close to the family who would have started murmuring quiet little conversations about the possibility that Brandon's death wasn't an accident. The official story didn't add up. No reason to even think that a live bullet should have been anywhere near that set. And given the family history, suspecting foul play did not seem far-fetched. Was someone after the Lee family? Were there old vendettas left over from Bruce's time? Or was it just that one man's calamitous tragedy cast an unyielding shadow on his son's life? In a nexus of conspiracy or pure coincidence, the wretched pattern cannot be shrugged aside. A father dies mysteriously at 32. The son dies 20 years later at 28. Both are shrouded in ambiguity. Both share the very thing they loved most: film. Adding even more devastation to the timing was Brandon's death, which took place just weeks before his wedding, just weeks before The Crow was to wrap up production. Everything felt like too many signs to ignore: the timing, the method, the symbolism. But if Bruce and Brandon were both victims of something more sinister, then the cover-up had to be even deeper than anyone imagined. The aftermath. When Brandon Lee died, the production of The Crow came to a screeching halt. Grief swallowed the cast and crew. For many, the set no longer felt like a workplace. It felt like a graveyard. The lead actor was gone. The man who had poured everything into this dark, poetic role was now the subject of the very tragedy the film depicted. And no one was prepared for the emotional fallout. At the center of it all was Michael Massey, the actor who unknowingly fired the shot that slain Brandon. He disappeared from the public eye almost immediately. Friends said he was devastated, inconsolable, and haunted by the moment. In interviews years later, Massey spoke sparingly about it, but when he did, his pain was still raw.
It's something that I'm gonna live with. It's taken me, took me the time it took to be able to not so much put it in perspective, but to be able to move on with my life.
"I don't think you ever get over something like that," he admitted. "It's a part of my life." He never watched The Crow. The shock spread quickly through Hollywood. Directors, actors, stunt coordinators, everyone who had ever worked on set with firearms was rattled. This wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a wake-up call. But while the industry mourned, questions began to mount. Who was responsible? Was this preventable? Could criminal charges be filed? The official investigation was launched immediately. Detectives examined the weapon, interviewed the crew, and reconstructed the events of the night. The .44 Magnum had been loaded with a blank, but the stuck bullet from an improperly made dummy round had turned that blank into a live round. The sequence was clear. The result? Devastating. Still, many felt the story wasn't complete. The media began to pry deeper. Whispers of foul play resurfaced. Journalists recalled the eerie connection to Game of Death, the film where Bruce Lee's character is shot on set with a real bullet. Now Brandon was gone under nearly identical circumstances. There was the unimaginable ordeal for Brandon's fiancée, Eliza Hutton, to digest. Weeks away from marrying the love of her life, she was now making arrangements for Brandon's memorial. She had been at his side in the hospital, holding his hand while the doctors tried to save him. And she never gave a public interview after his passing. Her silence spoke louder than words. Fans turned out in the very thousands, many of them visiting the Seattle cemetery where Brandon was buried alongside his father. Together in life, together in legacy. An incredibly poignant symbolism. For The Crow, it was almost the end. The studio discussed shutting the film down altogether. But after Eliza and Brandon's mother were consulted, the decision to complete the film as a tribute was made. Using doubles and early footage blended with state-of-the-art visual effects, the production team reconstructed Brandon's remaining work into a film. When it was finally released in 1994, it did not just perform. It became a phenomenon. Critics called it a wonderful performance by Brandon. Inseparable were the beautiful sound of it coming out and the tragedy in the poetry. He dies and haunts the slayers and crooks in this movie, but Brandon Lee dies in the act of bringing the movie's character to life. But despite all its rave reviews and box office success, there were still unfinished aspects. The district attorney's office carried the imprint. No criminal charges. There had been too many safety violations, but they were unable to prove criminal intent. Tragic accident, it was termed, nothing more. To many people, that was not quite enough. There are still questions about the timeline, unanswered queries about the dummy rounds, where safety personnel were during this event, and how this very rudimentary act-checking the barrel just got skipped. The publicist for The Crow had, however, contested an unsafe work environment. Much to the contrary was the view from within the crew was stressed, pushed to their limits, and too exhausted. And just when the world was beginning to move on, a chilling discovery from the autopsy would bring everything back into question. Because what they found inside Brandon's body didn't match what was supposed to be on set. The truth they almost buried. For months after Brandon Lee's death, the public was fed one version of the story, a tragic accident caused by mismanaged props, an overworked crew, and a blank round that interacted fatally with a stuck bullet. It was a plausible explanation, neat enough to satisfy the studio, convenient enough to avoid lawsuits, and just vague enough to blur the line between accountability and absolution. But the details in the official reports, particularly the autopsy, begged a closer look. One detail raised eyebrows immediately.
.44 caliber bullet was removed from Lee's body. Detectives are proceeding with the investigation.
The bullet retrieved from Brandon's body was a fully intact .44 caliber lead slug. But according to multiple statements from crew members, no live rounds were ever supposed to be on set. Blanks? Yes. Dummy rounds? Yes. Real bullets with powder and full charge? Absolutely not. So, how did a fully live round end up in the chamber of a prop gun? At first, investigators concluded that the bullet must have been dislodged from a dummy round with a leftover primer, as explained in the previous findings. But forensic experts reviewing the autopsy quietly questioned that version. The bullet was remarkably undamaged, clean, no signs of having been tampered with or improperly seated. Some began to suspect that this wasn't a modified dummy at all, but a real factory-manufactured round. That revelation would change everything. If it was a real bullet, that meant someone had to bring live ammunition to set, a direct violation of standard film safety protocol. Even in the early 90s, using live rounds on set was rare and considered extremely dangerous. But the official reports never confirmed who handled or manufactured the dummy rounds. Those records? Missing or never filed. The identity of the person responsible for loading the weapon that night? Still disputed. More troubling were the whispers from whistleblowers who had worked on The Crow. People who, years later, came forward with disturbing claims. One former crew member alleged that multiple prop bullets had been made improvisationally, without supervision. He claimed that the production had reused and recycled rounds to save time and money, often storing real and dummy rounds together in the same container. Another crew member said he saw actual rounds being brought in during earlier scenes that required realistic-looking ammo on camera, but no one ever confirmed if they had been removed afterward. And then came the suggestion that sabotage couldn't be ruled out. This wasn't just a tabloid noise. According to Detective J.J. Leitner, who spearheaded the investigation, nothing's been ruled out. Leitner himself conceded years later in an interview that he harbored a gut feeling about the ambiguous case, which he never could deliver. So who could have a motive? Some conspiracy theorists even brought back the idea of a vendetta out of Bruce Lee's death, bringing them along the lines that Brandon could be a target for the same reasons by rival studios, jealous insiders, or even the remnants of the Chinese syndicates that Bruce reportedly defied. Others speculated Brandon's having gained fame might do something to set someone's teeth on edge scenarios, especially in an industry where legacy, money, and power could create resentment. And just like that, there was the added element of reality that Brandon died reenacting his father's fictional death. In Game of Death, Bruce Lee's character is slain on the sets of a film by an accidentally loaded gun with a live round. The situation is almost identical to what happened with Brandon in The Crow, all the way down to the framing, the timing, and the tragic aftermath. Was it a coincidence? Or was someone sending a very real, very lethal message using fiction? No official charges were ever filed. No new evidence was introduced. And after some time, the story was lost in Hollywood legend. But the legacy of Brandon Lee and the mystery around his death never faded. Because in the end, no matter how many reports, theories, and so-called answers are thrown into the mix, there is still one question. Who put that bullet in the gun? And why did no one stop them? Brandon Lee's death wasn't just a Hollywood tragedy. It was a painful echo of a family legacy stained with mystery, mismanagement, and unanswered questions. What do you think happened? Was it a freak accident, or did someone want Brandon Lee dead? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more shocking Hollywood true stories, hit like, subscribe, and watch the next video right here.